this video, we're going to look at right triangles. And when we look at right triangles, a couple of things that we need to remember is that we have this triangle. It has a right angle here. The hypotenuse, which is always the longest side, is across from the right angle. One of the formulas that we have for right triangles is called the Pythagorean theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where c is always your longest side. It's always your hypotenuse. A and b can be put in either position. Now, when I have just 3 points, and I want to determine if they are points of a right triangle, I need to find the distance between each one. So let's look at if we have -2, 1. This is going to be point A. Point B will be 2, 5. And point C will be 5, 2. Now I could look at this on a graph, but sometimes looking at the graph, it's not very good at a representation because it may look like we have a right triangle, but we may not. And so I'm going to look at, let's first look at the distance between A and B. So I'm looking at this point and this point. So I'm going to take my x2, and that's not a negative. My x1 is the negative, so I'm going to have 2 minus a -2 squared plus a 5 minus 1 squared, and I'm going to take the square root of that. So 2 minus a -2 becomes 2 plus 2, so we have 4 squared plus a 5 minus 1, which is going to be a 4 squared. So 4 squared plus 4 squared is 16 plus 16. So we have the square root of 32. Now, most of the time we would attempt to break this down, but when we're looking for the vertices of a right triangle, I definitely don't want to break it down because I want to look at the possibility of what's happening to it. And for whatever reason, my scroll is being very touchy. So let's try this. So that was the distance from A to B. Now, let's look at the distance from A to C. So my C had an x of 5. My A had -2 squared. My C had a 2, and my A had a 1y. And so 5 minus a -2, so that becomes 5 plus 2, which is 7 squared. 2 minus 1 is 1 squared. Notice I'm not dropping off that square root symbol. So 7 squared is 49. And 1 squared is 1. So I get the square root of 50. Now I've got 2 of my distances. I still need to do one more distance. This distance is going to be from B to C. And so we're going to look at a 5 minus 2 squared plus 2 minus 5 squared. And so 5 minus 2 is going to be 3 squared plus a -3 squared. So that will give me 9 plus 9 squared. So I get the square root of 18. Now I'm going to come over to a graph and kind of plot these points a little bit. So A, I had -2, 1. B, I had at 2, 5. And C, I had at 5, 2. And then we did our distances. So I had distance from A to B. Let me go back and see. So we first started with our distance from A to B. Okay. So let me actually, we started with distance from A to B. And distance from A to B, we got to be the square root of 16. Then we did the distance from A to C. And from A to C, we got the square root of 50. Then our last distance that we did was from B to C. And we got the square root of 18. So looking at this picture, we can see that the square root of 50 is going to be our longest side. So AC is going to be our longest side. What that tells me is that if this is a right triangle, this angle has to be a right angle. Now looking at it, I might be able to say, yeah, it looks like a right angle. But the thing is it may or may not be. So what we actually have to do is, using these distances that we've calculated, we need to find the Pythagorean theorem. And so the Pythagorean theorem again says a squared plus b squared equaled that c squared. Well, our a was the square root of 32, quantity squared. And then our b was our square root of 18, quantity squared. And our c was the square root of 50, quantity squared. Now the reason why I did not break these down and I left the square roots here is because if you recall, a square will cancel a square root as long as it's just a single number underneath there. So taking the square root of 32 and then squaring it gives me 32. Square root of 18 squared gives me 18. And the square root of 50 squared gives me 50. So I have 32 plus 18, which is 50. So yes, these 3 points do create a right triangle. So this is a right triangle. Now if I had changed any one of my points, it may or may not have been. The thing is we can't always guarantee what our eyes see. We have to actually do the math to prove it. So practice some of these, and then let me know if you have questions.